I was educated at James McCosh Grammar School, which is now Emmett Till. I attended Englewood High School. And what's interesting, all of my siblings, except my oldest sister, Mattie, all went to James McCosh Grammar School and Englewood High School. I attended Lincoln Memorial Congregational Church when I was 5, and I've been there ever since. There was a little boy that I played with through the fence. I think I was 3, and I think he was white. And we would play, and one day he bit me, and my parents heard me screaming, so they ran out in the yard to retrieve me, and they said, "Don't play with them anymore." The next couple of days, we were playing again, and I got his hand in my mouth, and they said they had to literally pry it open. But the reason I'm telling you that story is that that was, at that time, the neighborhood was changing. It was changing from one nationality to another. And as I remembered, there were the first people I feel that moved in retrospect, were African Americans. At that time, we were colored, and they didn't look like they were colored. And so they were able to transition in the community without any incident. And I guess as time went on, members of their families would come to visit them, and then they would know that these people were not what the former neighbors thought they were. And so gradually the colored and African American began to move into that community. It was, as I remember, it was a lovely community to grow up in. There were people from all walks of life. Some of our school teachers lived in our neighborhood. There were a couple of people that were doctors. There was Dr. Blewett, who owned a 3-flat building behind me. I lived on Champlain. There was Dr. White, whose daughter we just buried a couple of weeks ago. And there was Dr. Cooper. Dr. Cooper lived next door to me. He was a bone specialist. And I remember when we moved there, he had gotten a fellowship to study in Europe. And he, to me, did not look like my family. His wife didn't look like my family, and they had just returned from Europe. They had one son, Homer. The people that lived in Woodlawn at that time, they were various economic and social differences and backgrounds. There were people who worked on the railroad. My father was an iceman. He had his own business. At first he had a horse and wagon that he delivered ice in, and then as times went on, he owned a truck, and he would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to the part of the city which was in the 40s and 30s. We lived on 66 in Champlain, and that's where he would sell ice. During the winter, he would sell coal, and that's how he took care of his family. He worked very hard. I seldom saw him in the morning because he got up at 4 o'clock in order to go and pick up his ice and fill his truck to sell ice to the people. Now, at that time, you could buy ice for 25 cents and 50 cents. And if you knew an iceman, they wore a sort of a heavy canvas cover, and they had the ice tongs, and they would carry the ice 25 pounds or 50 pounds on their backs. And at that time, people had ice boxes. Some of them were wooden, and some of them, I remember, they were kind of metal, and you put the ice in the top, and you put a little pan underneath, so when the ice melted, you would take the pan out and pour it out until all the ice had disappeared. As time changed during World War II, people began to make more money, and they were able to buy refrigerators, so his business kind of disappeared. But before his passing, it was still active. He died when my oldest brother was overseas during World War II.
So
That is fascinating. There were 4,000 businesses from Stony Island to Halsted on 63rd Street. And instead of our going downtown, or as the loop as you call it, we would go to 63rd and Halsted because there was a Sears and Roebuck's. And I can't remember the store that was across the street from it. There was Hillman's, the food store. Any store that you wanted, clothing, foods, you could get on Halsted. And even up and down 63rd Street, there was a little dress sports show, it was called. I can't remember the name, where we wore Sloppy Joe sweaters at that time when I was young, and the loafers, the brown and white saddle oxfords, and we could go on the more big Sloppy Joe sweaters you had. That meant that you were socially and financially above the maddening crowd, so to speak. But the reason Helen Harper was the name of the store. At that time, have you ever heard of layaway? The layaway. You never heard of that? Well, when one would lay away clothing, Carson's, and a lot of the other stores, because people at that time did not make a lot of money.